Thanks for attending Comsverse. Today's session is the Teams Telephony case study with Paul Millen and Kevin Hammets. And over to you guys.
Good evening, everyone, or good morning, or good, late in the evening if it's afternoon, whatever time you're joining. So thank you. My name is Paul Millen. I'm a solution architect for Simity, and I'm here to discuss a case study we have with one of our customers, Johnson Matthey, and a global remote deployment we did for Teams with direct routing. Just give you they're all our kind sponsors who are helping with the event, and obviously you'll be able to see this. You'll be familiar with many of these sponsors. So this is a case study, Johnson Matthey. We're going to tell you a little bit about the client. But first, let me just give you a little bit brief overview of Simity. We're a voice and goal communications partner. We're based out of the UK, but we do a lot of global deployments. We've deployed over 70 Microsoft Telephony deployments with over 35,000 enterprise voice users and over 600 Teams rooms. I'll leave this in the slide so you can see for yourselves, but some of our customers and our capabilities. And just to give you an idea of where we've done some work with Microsoft phone system, these are some of the countries where we have deployed a phone system around the world. So we have some excellent experience and some very talented people working in an organization. Okay, so let's look at the clients. The client, his name is Johnson Matthey. Johnson Matthey is a world leader in sustainable technologies. They are a FTSE 100 company, and they were founded in 1817. They are located globally, so they're in 3 regions, Europe, Middle East and Africa, in the Americas regions and Asia Pacific. They have over 30 countries, their sites in over 30 countries around the world, including 43 manufacturing sites, with over 15,000 workforce, and they run a 24/7 operation. So it's very, very clear that telephony is a very important part of their business and business critical to them, and certainly some challenges. So let's look at the challenges we've been faced with. So how do you migrate a 200-year-old manufacturing organization with multiple legacy telephony platforms to Teams, including enterprise voice? Would like to point out this has happened throughout the COVID period as well. So we're talking about remote deployments without actually having at times staff available from that customers to help us. So it's been some incredibly challenging moments. They have complex mission critical telephony, so something that they must be able to make calls 24/7. Incredibly important that they can still maintain and receive calls during, before and during the migration to Teams. Have multiple location types, so manufacturing plants, laboratories, multi-campuses sites, modern offices. So for instance, 1817, they brought some of those sites are nearly to over 100, 150 years old. Not so many structured cabling, lots of concrete, lots of analog cabling running through. So you can imagine that does provide some challenges when moving to voice over IP technology, especially in certain areas where you have to have intrinsically safe devices. So there is a lot of design work goes into to be able to support that. The current mixture of on-premise Skype Business Enterprise Voice, which Simity were involved in deploying, plus lots of sites with still disparate PBX technologies, so mixtures of Cisco, Siemens, Alcatel, as you can see there, etc. As well as that, some of that telephony is VoIP, while some of it is analog as well. So not only are we dealing with standard VoIP products, which are a lot easier to deal with, but traditional telephony with MDF frames and spaghetti of wires, all trying to route back to understand where phones are situated. They also have a lot of third-party integrations, such as trading systems, call recording, contact center requirements, and therefore all this needed to also work with Teams. Just to understand the scope, there was around 40 sites in scope across 3 regions, and again, these were mixed network capabilities. Not every site had specifically the great network connections, and therefore that had to be taken into account when we're doing our network sizing and impacting the potential impact to Teams on their network. And also they had a regionalized internet breakout. So unfortunately, there were no local breakouts for each site. There was dynamic IP allocation on those egress points to the internet, and therefore that did bring some challenges when designing direct routing. So how did we do it? So Symmetry run a deployment remotely. So all our staff are work out of virtual offices, and we're able to undertake these deployments without having to visit site. We do rely on the customers to help with local hands. Sometimes with that's if it's racking a piece of equipment that needs to be there, if it's helping out with deploying some phones, meeting rooms. When we do the meeting room deployments, we usually tend to send people to site. But generally with the telephony, the Teams telephony and direct routing, it's all done remotely. And this allows us to work more flexibly. We can meet the customer's needs. We can work during different time zones to help meet those and deliver those requirements. For Johnson Matthey, the deployment was cut into 2 phases. Phase 1 was around Teams Core, and phase 2 was around telephony. Teams Core, was really around the enablement of Teams, including chats, the internal audio, video, meetings, guest access. Collaboration has actually initially been blocked. It's something that they want to do, a customer wants to do at a later date. So from the collaboration point of view, that will come as a later phase. But effectively every other thing outside of telephony was delivered during phase 1, and that was delivered across 15,000 users. That obviously brought into some discussions around interops, because running Skype for Business on premise with enterprise voice, this customer also needs to be able to maintain their telephony. So, and my colleague Kevin later will discuss how we handled that, how we introduced those different ways of working for the customer. To ensure that we deliver successfully, we've developed a structured framework which adheres to Microsoft best practices. This has been refined over many successful deliveries, and it's broken down into 3 stages: plan, delivery, and operate. So first of all, in the plan, we survey and capture the requirements. So firstly, we need to understand the geography of the client. Where in the world are they situated? What sort of site types are there? Are they standard offices, plants, laboratories, campuses? Sometimes they're a mixture. We then need to start looking at the profiles of the users. How do they work? Where are they based? What do they do? What tools do they use? How often do they use them? We then need to look at the telephony. What PBX technologies are using at the site? Is it analog? Do they use VoIP? Do they have external numbers like DDIs or DIDs, or are they just using internal extensions and auto attendance? Is there wireless handsets, fax machines, analog devices, hunt groups, third-party services? Then we look at what UC&C tools, what communication tools they're using at the moment, what collaboration tools they're using at the moment. Do we have to migrate them away? Are they using tools which are very similar, and therefore can we how does that affect the way we change for the business? And also the productivity tools. Are they using the standard Office suites? Are they using what clients are they using, what versions? So survey and capture is one of the critical points of this, to ensure we understand exactly what the customer has, and we can affect that change. Then we need to assess the network and the likely impact. Network is everything with Teams. As you know, Teams is a cloud-based service, and being able to connect to it as quickly as possible without any issues, without any problems, is absolutely one of the key items to me. So we determine how they connect to the internet. Are they using local? Are they using centralized breakouts? Do they have proxy services deployed? Are those proxy services aware of Office 365? What firewalls deployed, and do they undertake any sort of package inspection? Then we need to understand the network topologies. How's their WAN set up? What sort of LAN do they have? Do they have Wi-Fi? Do they have corporate Wi-Fi? Is it guest Wi-Fi? When we look at their topologies, are they using SD-WAN? Are they using MPLS? Are they point-to-point? Is it VPN technology? And what are the link sizes, and how much are they utilized? Are there any traffic optimizers in the way that could impact the quality of that voice? And does the network support power over Ethernet? Because everyone, every site generally needs to have phones somewhere, and so power over Ethernet is quite a key requirement. And additionally, quality of service. As in times if there's any congestion, then you want to make sure that your voice, your real-time voice and video traffic is getting priority. We then use the information we've gathered from the surveys to understand the profiles, to match that against using the Microsoft planning tools. So to see if there are any areas that we need to be concerned about that we can flag early on to the customer, any network constraints that may need some sort of action to ensure before we've gone live that we're prepared, that we have mitigations or something's been put in place. Those two key points will then lead to how we'll then look to produce that high-level design. Obviously, we'll have a steer from the customer right at the start. We know they want to go to Teams. We know they want to go to Teams direct routing. So we will then produce the high-level design. Off the back of that, on the phase one, we had the global design for Teams core services. That covers everything you need to do around Teams, not just around voice, but also that covers around the security, the compliance, the client types, the administration. So all of those other areas, all of those those services that underpin Teams. We then also look to do site-based telephony designs. They are then dedicated for that site and talks about how we're going to provide that direct routing. We look at those local requirements, make sure that we deliver them, and make sure that they can be tested against, so the customer's happy that the service does what it needs to do. Finally, in the plan phase, we go through our test strips, we create them, we make sure that we know we can test exactly to how we're going to deliver it. And then we talk about deliver. So deliver is the point where we do it, where we actually produce our low-level designs, so we know the configuration. We look at we write designs for our core services, make sure our policies are correct, make sure the customer knows if they want guest access, if they want the ability to have meetings, if they want to allow anonymous into those meetings, the calling policies, the apps policies, the setup policies. So we go through all the policies with them and make sure we agree what the look and feel of Teams will be like. And then we do our local designs for our telephony. So now we're looking at the voice routes and the SPC configurations and the normalization rules, the dial plans that determine how a user will use Teams when they're making and receiving calls. Then build as per the low-level designs, and then we run our testing and piloting, firstly on our core stage for Johnson Matthey, because we're moving across to Teams as an organization, and then next through those telephony first stages as we phase those migrations from moving to Skype for Business or from disparate PBXs to Teams direct routing. And finally, part of this is the user and device migration. Again, we deploy that core stage, we move everyone across. Again, this will be what covered as part of Kevin's section, where he talks about the need to understand the interop and how that manifests for the usage. And then we deploy our telephone stages. Finally, in the operate, we move the project we move the project into a life support where the project supports them. We'll then go through an operational acceptance, and on that approval of that, service goes into full support, and we look to retire the legacy solution. So if we quickly look at the design, the design was to obviously achieve a global rollout of Teams, including migration from Skype for Business with on-premise enterprise voice, to maintain communication with use of Teams coexistence mode to support a phased migration approach, to deploy Teams direct routing to support full migration to Microsoft Teams Telephony, telephony regionalized to simplify and consolidate infrastructure, reduce administration and realize cost savings by utilizing SIP and retiring legacy circuits. Teams Telephony was deployed in a modular design. So Johnson Matthey are using a global SIP carrier for many of their sites for hosted direct routing. Regional cloud-based audio codes SBC infrastructure was deployed with SIP trunking and configured for direct routing, and also local audio codes gateways SBCs are used where a global carrier cannot provide full PSTN replacement. Cloud-based SBCs also are used to do the connectivity into any third-party services such as voice recording, and local audio codes analog gateways deployed to support legacy telephony. Quickly brief through the architecture. As you can see with the Teams direct routing, Office 365 presents all the Teams services, including telephony and chat, presence, meetings, sharing, voicemail, collaboration. The SBCs, I should put the laser pointer. SBCs in the SIP carrier will provide routing direct to Microsoft Teams and routes calls to Teams and services via those carrier SBCs, and numbers are ported to the SIP provider. Then we have the Azure-based SBCs, the route analog and third-party traffic to customer Azure SBCs. So this is where there are certain things that the carrier, hosted carrier, can't route to analog, so they have to selectively route to specific telephone numbers to the Azure SBCs that can then route them down to the customer sites and into that analog equipment and third parties. And where we can't support, so areas like Japan, China, India, where we're deploying, where we can't use SIP outside of the country, often it's local circuits deployed with local SBCs on sites. Numbers are maintained, and then actually the Azure SBCs are configured to do the routing. So we route the traffic from the on-site gateways through to Azure SBCs in regions that then route to Teams. So I'll quickly look at the two models that we have here. So the carrier-hosted direct routing. In here we can see that we have the carrier SIP service that's hosted, and they have connectivity to the PSTN. They also have direct routing configured into Teams. So when numbers are ported, that's the route that the calls will take. We've got the Azure hosted SBCs deployed to support the analog and third-party integrations, which we've talked about. And we have SIP trunks between the carrier and the Azure SBCs. Azure SBCs are also configured for direct routing, and that gives us flexibility, that gives customer flexibility to be able to route calls directly without having to go back up to the carrier if they're outbound calls coming from analog or third parties. We have VPN or express route where it is in places connecting, so we can have the customer sites. This is predominantly for the third parties, but also analog, although due to the challenges of how the customer network is set up, internal connectivity was the simplest way to be able to get those analog connections up to the Azure SBCs. Analog gateways are connected via SIP, and then the devices are connected to the gateways with the third-party integrations also connected via SIP. Media bypass has been considered on a case-by-case basis, but for much of Johnson Matthey's requirements, as their network egress points are across the WAN, they break out in regional locations, media bypass does not offer much benefit to them. So the key points here is Azure SBCs required for routing analog and third-party calls for PSTN and Teams, WAN connectivity to Azure required for internal analog third-party routing, and internal routing not available due to complexities in WAN routing, firewalls, and limited public IPs. Then we have our Azure hosted direct routing. So this is where we, the global carrier cannot provide telephony for the customer. In this instance, we have a local SBC on site. Usually it's with a prior ISDN circuit connected. If it's analog, that is also in the site. SIP services terminate directly on the Azure SBCs because that gives us some flexibility. We do have the option of using a different carrier if need be, and to bring that in if that carrier can support that location. Azure SBCs are deployed with direct routing to allow that connectivity into Teams to support Teams calling, and analog gateways are connected to both the Azure SBCs, and where there's a local SBC as well, provides a bit of resilience in the case of a problem with the WAN. Analog can still function. Azure Express Route or VPN is connecting between the customer site and the Azure SBCs. Where in certain countries like China and other countries where the latency, or you're routing through VPN because you can't break out through the Chinese firewalls, we look to implement local media optimization to try and keep the media as close to the PSTN as possible. Here is it supports the customer sites where SIP carriers cannot provide full PSTN services. Customers, SBCs manage the PSTN and direct routing, and Azure SBCs are responsible for routing direct to Teams. So we're not routing directly from the local sites due to the challenges of the local sites not having the infrastructure to support public IPs. So the key design takeaways from this, our learnings were understand the geography of the client. Where in the world are they situated? What sort of site types are there? I.e. standard offices, plants, labs, campuses, etc. Identify the user types across the organization, how they use the service, from where and how often. What PBX technologies do they use at each site? Is it centralized or local? Are they analog or VoIP? Do they have DDIs, internal extensions? Are there wireless handsets, fax machines, hunt groups, attendance services, etc.? Determine how they connect to the internet, local versus centralized breakouts, proxy services deployed, are the Office 365 aware, and what firewalls deployed, and is any packet inspection undertaken? What network types are in use? Is it SD-WAN, MPLS, point-to-point, VPN? Identify the link sizes and current utilization. Are traffic optimizers involved, and have wireless networks being deployed and configured to support VoIP? Does the network support power over Ethernet, and do all network types support quality of service? Determine if they use client VPN technology, and does it support split tunneling? Assess the network impact. Use the identified user profiles, map them against the network links and sizes, look at the existing utilization to understand what that utilization may be, and ensure that you know if there's going to be any impact to any site before the service goes live. Some of the other areas that I've not covered that should be considered are licensing and costs, security and compliance, administration and support, client installs, updates, etc. Now I'll pass over to Kevin.
Great, thanks a lot, Paul. So yeah, my name's Kevin Hammonds. I'm the change lead at Cimitty. So I'll talk us through the sort of adoption journey for this fairly complex case. So something I've learnt along the way. Every team's project is different, and therefore every team's change and adoption project is different, and this is certainly the case. We've heard from Paul a bit about Johnson Matthey, global leader in sustainable technologies, and that word sustainable is quite key for Johnson Matthey. But they've kindly shared their sort of mission statement, if you like, which Teams sort of feeds into. So reducing costs, and where something like Teams can come in to that is maybe removing some of the other sort of conference providers, of which there are a multitude, but also efficiency gains and reducing cost in that way, creating a sustainable company. So think about pre-COVID times and all of the travel that we used to have to do, or thought we had to do. Let's put it that way. And obviously implementing Teams Telephony, meeting rooms, in a sense gives us that sort of reduction in travel, and creates that sustainability for us. Obviously the agility and the efficient business comes from everyone working on the same platform. So for JM, Teams is the platform, and we're sort of getting towards the whole organization being on Teams with Teams Telephony. Everyone is on Teams, but Teams Telephony, that rollout's carrying on. The challenge that we had, this is why every project's different, and every change project's different. So really, we had around an 8-week sort of period, start to finish, to deploy Teams to 15,000 employees. So that was the first sort of big global rollout of everyone was getting Teams. So from 6 weeks, the first company-wide communication went out, and then 6 weeks later, everyone had Teams on their laptop. So that gives us a very distinct challenge in terms of adoption. You know, you can't do some of your best practices, but you really have to focus on sort of the important things, the communication aspects, and training, which is what we kind of really focused on. We also had two distinct groups of employees with very different journeys. As sort of Paul's alluded to, we've got the current state of Skype being in the organization, but some users had Skype non-telephony, so Skype with a desk phone basically. And then we have other users that Skype with telephony, so using Skype for everything. And so these two groups, we instantly had to sort of understand them and split them into two in terms of communications and training. And then also, you know, language, culture, and time zone considerations as well. So what we started with is really sort of the pillars of our project: speed to adoption. How quickly can we get these people using Teams? So yes, we're going to deploy Teams in a big bang, and then telephony sort of gradually. But we want to really focus on how quickly we can get everyone using it. High usage. How many people can we get using Teams, particularly in the world where we've got some of our user base that are in islands. And therefore have both Skype and Teams to use. We'd have a preference for them using Teams where they can, obviously Skype for telephony until they go through Skype. And how well they're able to use the tools in their high value activities in their jobs. So these are the things we bear in mind. So we need to understand the change and the change impacts before we can actually communicate, coach, and train them. So really, how they work today, how they're going to work in this interim phase, e.g. islands, and how we want them to work in a future state. And these are all the things we have to communicate and train. So probably the number one thing that we did at the start of the project, and it did take us a bit of time because, you know, to explain it and write it down is quite tricky. But we had Group A, the Skype non-telephony, who were going direct to Teams only. That was a simpler case. So you can see their sort of current state or the start point for them. They use Skype for Business to contact their colleagues, but they use their desk phone to make and receive external calls. And they can schedule conferences through some of the other conference capabilities. The end state is that they're going to use Teams for contacting their colleagues. They'll still use their desk telephone until we've rolled out their telephony to them. So this is very much talking about this big bang after the first 6 weeks of the project. But we want them to schedule their conferences through Teams. Group B, slightly more complex. These were enterprise voice users. So they started off using Skype for everything. We introduced islands so that they had Teams to contact their colleagues, schedule new conferences, but Skype to make and receive external telephone calls. So in that world, we needed to make sure that our communications that were understandable, but we were encouraging the use of Teams over Skype for certain instances or certain scenarios, while obviously accepting the external calls would still be through Skype until we rolled out the telephony piece, which, as I said, is sort of continuing to roll out to a huge number of sites. And their end state is they're going to use Teams for everything. So that was the sort of big bang, and as I said, then we're gradually rolling out telephony. So communicating across multiple channels, and it doesn't matter how many people live in a particular channel. I think it's just important that you get your messages out there. So the intranet was the global channel, but we also had Yammer, where there are a smaller base of users, but we set up Yammer with two groups, the Group A, who were the Skype non-telephony users, and Group B, the Skype telephony users. And we pushed communications into the Yammer network. Obviously, the use of email in a global organization, that's still a predominant communication tool. What we try to do is just make sure that our communication templates were consistent and had a consistent header and a consistent footer, so that they stood out from some of the other communication templates. And our sort of stakeholders, regular stakeholder meetings, making sure that they were up to date with the latest information. In terms of some of the communication tools that we used, so the previous slide was explaining a user journey. Once the project team and the communications team kind of understood that user journey, they could produce things like in the sort of middle top, which is a stop, start, continue communication. So a nice way for an end user who doesn't really care it's hugely, whether they're using Skype or Teams, they just want to know what to do. And actually, trying to explain to them in this, stop using these tools. You can start using Teams for this, but you can continue using Skype for a certain activity. So a very clear, concise message for someone who's hasn't got a huge amount of time to understand what the ins and outs of the situation. So you can write it in there, stop, start, continue, but also just below that, pictures, paint a thousand words, as they say. So painting the picture of what people use today and actually what we want them to use in the future. So that can help the more visually based people. In terms of stakeholders, what's Teams in a nutshell? Just a sort of card with what the organization is trying to achieve and what Teams is going to achieve for the organization, for your senior stakeholders, and obviously your FAQs and that sort of thing. What we did is we also employed different training methods for different learners or different types of learners, along with feedback mechanisms. So we used Teams live events to run our training sessions. One, because we can get a huge number of people into the sessions, albeit with the caveat that we had to bear in mind some internet bandwidth aspects for certain sites, which meant we split out some of our sessions based on that. But we could get a huge number of people in. I think one of our larger training sessions had around 650 people in the session. And it got people used to Teams in a sort of small way. They were joining a Teams live event, learning about Teams, and it kind of makes sense. We ran 50 sessions over a 3-week period. This again sort of alluding to the period just before March, so our sort of big bang of 15,000 users getting Teams. And questions were sort of asked about why we should run so many sessions, and actually it's a case of why shouldn't you give people the opportunity to join a session. Because it's Teams live events, they can pick any session that they want. They can attend multiple sessions. We didn't need to worry about tracking or understanding who was joining a session. We just had the Teams live reports coming out the back of it to see who had attended. But it was to give people the opportunity to attend a session, and people can't say that they didn't have that opportunity. And we ended up training about 25% of the organization in that way. In conjunction with self-study video, so you've got the wealth of Microsoft videos, but also some bespoke videos that we created around, particularly around telephony. Obviously, your mix of Microsoft and bespoke user guides. FAQs are really important, and actually one of the best ways to get FAQs is from your Teams live event, where you've got your Q&A set up, and people are asking questions. You can collate all of those questions and put them into FAQs, and then share them via your intranet or via Yammer or via Teams or however you're doing that. once we'd sort of gone live or ready to go live, a day one guide, very simple guides to the first 5 steps, the first 5 things that we want people to do, like make sure you're plugging in your headset, for example, and continuing that reinforcement of tips of the week. What's new in Teams, or here's how this feature works. Did you know, these sorts of things. And something I've just mentioned, but in the training sessions, Q&A, and obviously short training surveys at the back of the training session, so that you can understand people's feedback, tweak your courses. And the outcome, as you can see on the right-hand side there, is very favourable. In this case, we're comparing Skype usage to Teams usage in JM. But we're constantly measuring this progress using these sorts of insights, trying to understand where we need to push some further adoption measurements, as well as combined with things like surveys. So, for example, here, headset usage, we know that there's a bit more work to do to encourage people to continue to use the certified headsets. So we can identify some additional training needs. Constantly having to update your training and information artifacts based on the evergreen teams. And continued our business champion engagement. So getting, you can get great feedback from the business champions, just what they hear on the ground. And as I mentioned before, top tips and new features communicated via channels. So that's all I wanted to talk about in terms of the adoption, and I think that wraps up our session.
Great, Kevin. Yeah, we have at least one question for you guys. Somebody asked, which country was the most difficult to deploy in, and what was the most difficult telephony service to migrate?
I guess I better take that one. So, well, we have a mix of countries. Obviously, assuming you're deploying in countries which are sort of further away from you, either the places that's more remote in terms of where you're based. That's always a bit of a challenge. Certainly, China comes to mind. We've had a number of deployments for China. China in itself is a challenge because obviously there's kind of well known the Chinese firewall that stops connectivity for services like Teams and other Office 365 applications. In fact, China doesn't actually have Teams. China offer a service called 21 ViaNet, which has a Microsoft version of Office, but it doesn't have Teams in it. So to consume Teams in China, it needs to be via a global tenant, and then you need to have a VPN technology to route out of China into somewhere like Hong Kong or Singapore. From there, you can break. So we have to put infrastructure into China. Effectively, there's some challenges around trying to get Chinese circuits connected up, video calls going in comms rooms in the middle of a plant to make sure that the circuits were connected correctly to and the right types of circuits were connected to the audio codes gateway on site, which was a lot of visual translations going on to try and get messages across with the local operators around what the connectivity should look like. So that was some of the challenges. And then once we can get hold of the actual telephone numbers, and we can get the calling into the gateway, then we can route everything out through the customer VPN network breakouts to Teams, and as you say, use those Azure SBCs. So that was certainly a challenge. Other things like a lot of DECT solutions we have to integrate with ASCOM devices and other third-party DECT services where you're doing SIP trunks into those third-party PBX systems, those third-party switches. Make sure you get your interop working and your interconnecting working, so that you're able to make and receive calls between teams and those third-party solutions, the hold and transfer works, and those solutions can also still connect to the PSTN. So, yep, some real challenges. Probably the third-party DEX solutions are some of the challenging ones, and obviously countries like China, India, Japan, they do provide some challenges technically and also linguistically. I hope that answers the question.
Seemed good to me, but if that didn't, and the attendee is still on, we do have the breakout happening right after this session. I posted the link to that. I did have a little typo, apologies, but it will be with the presenters. So Paul and Kevin will join the breakout session right after this to have any conversations or answer any questions directly in a Teams meeting for this instead of just through the Q&A panel. Since there's no new questions, Paul and Kevin, I'll let you guys go to the breakout session. Thank you so much for presenting. It was a great session. Very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.